Narcissistic people are always naturally drawn to leadership. They like being in power. They like the control. So I think we're in the ultimate era of narcissism in politics.
Do you think that the reason why Trump is so triggering is because you think that he's a narcissist?
When Trump won in New Hampshire, you'd think he'd be happy. But the first thing he did was he spent most of his time getting mad at Nikki Haley. That to me was such a classical move. That, remember what we just said, can a narcissistic person be happy? Even when they're at the top, they're not happy because they're looking at who's here. So they waste their happy times putting down the other person. So
Yeah.
here was his moment, and he spent it criticizing someone else. You tell me what that is. I'm sure there are some small town candidates, town councils, state representatives. There's some mayors out there that are probably good people who want what's right for their town. But at this national and global stage, we are not seeing it. We can complain about these politicians all we want, but the narcissistic politicians are the ones who we keep voting for.
Taking care of your health isn't always easy, but it sure should be simple. I have been taking AG1 for a couple of years now. I take it first thing in the morning on an empty stomach, which is how they recommend to take it. It has helped me feel the most healthy that I've ever been. That's because AG1 delivers all of the vitamins, minerals, prebiotics, probiotics that I need for my gut health, which is where I feel like I've had the most improvement. My stomach feels flat, not bloated ever. I can accept any food so much easier. I have more energy every day. My skin looks better. There's a million things that I feel like AG1 has helped with to make me my healthiest self. It's just one scoop mixed in water every day, and it makes me feel the healthiest I've ever been. If there's one product I had to recommend to elevate your health, it's AG1, and that's why I've partnered with them for so long. If you want to take ownership of your health, try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3 plus K2 and get 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase exclusively at drinkag1.com/prettyintense. That's drinkag1.com/prettyintense. Check it out. Oh my God, how's it going? How is the book putting it together? Oh my God, books are so much work, aren't they?
I don't think I've ever worked this hard, maybe graduate school, but it's so much work. You know, the promotion stuff is not what comes naturally to me. The writing, easy.
Coming from someone grateful for your work,
Thank you.
you're excellent with this stuff. You're an excellent communicator. You put things in a way that people can grasp it, which is so important.
Thank you.
If someone's been lucky enough to not have been a victim of it, God bless, right? And the goal would be to not ever have anyone.
Sure.
But I mean, it almost seems like you have to have had experienced it to actually really get it and understand it. Like, because the abuse is so nuanced and it's small and it's like 1,000 stabs along the way. How do we help someone that hasn't been a victim of it before? Like, what are the red flags to look for so that you don't get into that position, which we're going to go way into because it's such a deep wound.
Yeah. So I'm gonna even rewind that a little bit, because exactly what you're talking about. We recently put a YouTube video out about this, which is there is a strange, special, incredibly lucky subset of people who really have not experienced this, or whatever they've experienced is so mild, or the person not that significant in their life. So in other words, they came from happy families where parents were happily married, the parents weren't narcissistic, close-knit family, siblings weren't like this. If there were any people in the family, either the strength of the core family, just sort of everybody believed everyone, right? So they would say, no, that's not okay. You shouldn't talk like that. And then they're fortuitous enough to go into adulthood and meet someone and get into a long-term committed relationship with someone who's not narcissistic and work in a place where they don't work with significantly narcissistic people. There are, in fact, people out there like this, believe it or not. And they're a tricky group of people because some of them can be a support to people going through this. But unfortunately, it's exactly the point you were making, Danica. If you don't understand what this is, it's almost like someone trying to explain a UFO and you've never seen one. And you're sort of like, oh, that's sweet. You saw green men. And you're like, no. This is
really bad. You really don't want this.
Scary. And so to your point, though, to people who, especially and I think your question almost relates a lot to people maybe who may not have had this in a family of origin, but are now adults and they're dating and they're meeting people. What about there? And I think number one is believe in it. Because if you think like, oh, this is sort of a made up thing that bitter people in relationships are putting out there, you're playing with karma. I mean, you're going to get bit. So
Totally. Or so many
understand.
guys that are like, every girl just says they're dating a narcissist. And you're like, well,
Well, yeah, I mean, like, look inward, dudes. So I think that it's believed that it's a thing that, if I think one of the tricky bits here is that we know how many people, we can estimate how many people have NPD because people have done that research and they come into research labs and you study them and you interview them. It's a little bit trickier to make this estimate of how many people in the population are narcissistic enough that it would cause trouble for other people. The spitballed number that myself, other experts, just based on if you added up all the years of work we've done in this, like it's just a lot of time we've done in this, I'm guessing probably like 1 in 6. So somewhere between 15, maybe 20% if you live in a big city like LA. But that's 15 to 20% where the narcissism is enough that you're like, okay, this behavior is not okay, right? So it's not like it's the majority, not even by a long shot, not even close to half. But statistically speaking, if you know 5 people, by those or 6 people, by those odds, you probably one of them might be there. All of that said is that I think that people, you have to believe it's true. B, you need to understand the tricky bit that they often come in strong, charming, charismatic, confident, attractive. They say the right things. They're very attuned initially. And that's also what throws people off because I think, Danica, the mistake they make is they're looking for the red flags and the warning signs you'd see 8 months into a relationship in the first month. And they're probably not going to show up then. So it's almost as though all this good stuff you might be experiencing with someone, their attunement and they're fun and they're curious and they're confident and they're successful. Great, great, great. Slow down. It's really about pressing the brakes and always taking it slow. If a narcissistic person's really into you, they like to go fast because in a way, it's almost like they're going to get your supply and it's like the butterfly under glass. They'll be able to trap you and then you'll get trauma bonded and you'll sort of be in it. But if you slow down, you tune into your body, you pay attention to this doesn't feel good. Like there's something here that doesn't quite feel right. Pay attention to that. It's really about being discerning. And I was just talking with someone recently and I said, so many people spend so much time analyzing what they eat, what they drink, spending $60 for some bottle of juice, choosing the right clothing, choosing the right car, comparison shopping for a suitcase, for heaven's sake. And so they'll go through all that for those things. But when it comes to people, we're incredibly undiscerning. We almost feel like we're being mean if we do that. Right. But yet you're going to be real fussy about a suitcase, but you're not going to be fussy about who you spend time with. And so we almost need to level up on how we think about those things, slowing down, paying attention, recognizing what kind of behavior is not appropriate, what is narcissism, what is gaslighting, all of that, and slow down. But this should have been taught in school. Like, I honestly think this is something we should teach kids in middle school and high school, so they already know that these patterns in a relationship are not okay.
100%. There's a lot of things that probably should be taught in school that aren't taught in school that would be really helpful in our lives. I'm pretty sure I didn't need any geometry. But so what are those signs? You said they move really fast, and when I'm asking these questions, I'm coming from experience a lot on this. So give me some, I want to hear what are the signs along the way? Because there's moving fast, but then there's things that also happen. My experience, kind of words and actions not always matching, like letting you down, being late to things, changing the plans last second. So can you keep adding to this sort of basket of things that happen at the very beginning along with this moving fast, because there's so much good, right? It feels magical. And they tell you we're soulmates, we're twin flames even, or I can't believe that you're single, and how am I so lucky? And God, they say all the right things, right? And they like all the same things you like, but there are the negative signs. So can you help us out with some of those?
So some of the other ones is, pay attention to how they receive any form of feedback, right? So while you're basking in that they're doing everything perfectly, you're often sort of becoming supply. Oh my gosh, this is so nice. Thank you. No one's ever treated me this well. That's all supply for them. But there may be a day You might even give them feedback that you don't even think is a criticism, sort of like, I don't think this is the right parking lot for this place. What do you think? I don't know how to drive. Like, you don't know how I don't think how to drive a car. Oh yeah, Danica, you're the race car driver, so you always know where to park. So
Or when they tell me that I was a bad driver.
you're a bad driver. So
Because drama is fuel.
right, dramas. And then when they lose it, right, over something that's as small as they're literally parking in the wrong parking garage, you kind of catch yourself and you might even feel hurt. You might even look hurt. You might even get tears in your eyes or something like that. And then they'll double down on that and say, oh my gosh, are you really this sensitive? Are you that much of a baby that you're? And so you're now at that point, your wings are starting to get clipped because you're thinking, well, that maybe they're right. And so what's a big deal if you have to walk an extra 3 blocks and they don't validate the parking? This person pays for everything anyhow. So people then start thinking like I'm being unreasonable instead of a person just yelled at me when I gently said you're parking in the wrong place, and to really see that through the lens of this is unacceptable. But it's really challenging against the backdrop of all this other good stuff. They will also future fake. So there will be promises made and promises taken, but the promises are meant to keep you on the chain and keep you around, right? So there's something you want to do. And the funny thing about a narcissistic person early on is narcissistic people are very socially perceptive. We think of them as not having empathy, as though they're socially clueless, anything but. It's why they're such good salespeople. So they're very socially perceptive. They can really read a room, but they're only reading the room in a self-serving way. So they're very clear on what it is you want or need. That's what all that love bombing is. They're listening intently. And when they're listening to you so intently, they're figuring out what matters to you, what would hurt you, what would be a deal breaker for you, all those things, what you crave more than anything. And then they'll use those things if you're sort of, for example, maybe they'll sense you're disengaging a bit. And then they'll say, hey, you know what? I know you've really been wanting to do this road trip to such and such. And I know I've been too busy. Let's get it in the books for December. Let's do it. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, they really did hear me. Oh, December comes, it's around Thanksgiving. Like, oh, you know what? I had this thing come up at work. I can't do it. Now you've just spent another 4 months in the relationship. You can't get that 4 months back. So there's a lot of moving of the goalposts over and over and over again. But you want to believe because the thing they're offering shows that they were listening. And so you're thinking, it's not like they're just offering me some random gift. They really know what I want. They must really care. So and anytime you'll see that they're disappointed, you go to the restaurant, the table they requested doesn't come, they might get really surly with the server, or or they'll be really grossly entitled. Like, don't you know how often I come here? Don't you know who I am? I'm a this, I'm a that. I come here all the time. I could buy and sell you 100 times, or whatever horrific thing they say. They'll get really antagonistic if their car doesn't come out first, or they're from the parking lot, or they don't get the table they want, or they don't get the reservation they want. So that entitlement gets clipped, and they'll react angrily. A lot of people will say this when they're dating, like, something like that happened and it was kind of uncomfortable. But the way the narcissistic person would pass it off is they'd say, baby, I just wanted to make you a special night. I know I'm reacting strongly, but this was all for you. Now you feel like a terrible person because this poor host person at the restaurant got screamed at because it was for you. So you can see how this contorts in so many ways that even early in the game, people are getting confused.
Yeah, I'm glad you hit on that right at the end, because as you were talking, I wrote down just, as my notes as you're talking, and wrote down about how they make everything feel like your fault.
Yes.
It's a real friggin' art form that they do, but they make you feel like it's your fault, everything. And so how do they do that?
Well, they do it through a very, very well-constructed system of defenses, because the best way to convince someone of something is if you kind of believe it too. They have a lot of conviction, and that conviction isn't because deep, deep, deep in their soul they believe it, but it's their defenses to sort of maintain their grandiosity, their perfection. I could do nothing wrong. They makes them like Teflon. It's very easy because they don't have empathy, right? So if you don't have empathy, you don't feel bad about blaming something for which they're not responsible, and they're not even sort of consciously aware of this need to be perfectionist, to be perfect all the time. And so the blaming you, the deflecting to you, and making it seem like it was about you. Keep in mind too that they need a fertile target, right? So most of us, and I'd say that most of us are those targets because we're empathic, we're nice, we can say like, okay, that's a possibility. Things are plausible, and empathy, healthy empathy means like, oh,
Right.
maybe what they're saying is
Maybe it
right.
is my fault.
Maybe it is my
Maybe I
fault.
should work on
Yes.
myself. Maybe I should work on not being so reactive,
That's
even though
right.
they just dig the knife in as deep as they can. So you do. And if they don't get a reaction, dig it deeper.
They'll dig deeper because the reaction makes you look like you're out of control, and it makes them look well put together and sane. So they get to maintain the narrative like you're out of your mind or you're out of control or can you believe I have to put up with this kind of thing? And many people will say, before I got into this relationship, I was never a reactive person. I was actually very well put together. And because if you don't understand what narcissism is, you actually think you can get through to this person. That's the challenge. That's the problem. There's no getting through. So the minute you understand that, you don't try it anymore. So if a person were to understand that early in the game, the narcissistic person would walk because they'd recognize they're not going to. It's almost like a mark where a salesperson's looking for, right? So the person's literally coming in to kick the tires or check what the upholstery color of the car is and leave. Then the salesperson's like, these people aren't buying a car, and they're going to move on to someone else. So we really have to seem like the person who's not buying a car.
How about one thing that I feel like I got caught out in was I'm super honest. And so when there'd be questions in the beginning, like, oh, what should I not do? Like, tell me the things that I should like not do to make sure that I don't make you mad or that you'll leave. Like, what a freaking trap. Talk about what they do with that information.
Yeah. So early in the relationship, friend of mine, he calls it data mining. I just call it gathering intel. All of that intent focus, all of that interest. They'll ask questions like, what's your worst fear? What are the things
What's your biggest insecurity?
What's your biggest insecurity? And that feels like intimacy to a lot of people.
100%.
Talking about something vulnerable, and we're really opening up, and this is all that anybody wants. And so people go all in, but in essence, it's no different than somebody hacking into your computer and getting your social and all your credit card numbers. That's exactly what they're doing, but psychologically.
You think it's intimacy, and for those out there, like, maybe you get caught a little bit, maybe you've heard this and you try it. Try and ask them the question, because that's where it really gets interesting is when you get asked, what's your insecurity? And then you ask them, what's your insecurity? And then you get some bullshit answers. Like, I know what I bring to the table, which is something I heard.
Or they lie.
I'm like, I should have known that was just like the worst answer. Like, it's not an answer.
Or they lie. They literally will, they won't tell the truth. So now it's almost like, you see in cults, there'll be what we call collateralization, right? They'll get the goods on someone. So if that person tries to leave, they can shame them. So it's almost the equivalent of that. They'll know that, for example, your fear is abandonment, that maybe someone's mother, left the family when they were a child. So they forever know, but they have abandonment in their back pocket. So that's a classic play. And when a person in a narcissistic relationship, let's say they've done it all, they've watched the videos, they've listened to your podcast, they've read the books, they get it. They're 6 weeks into the relationship. Some of the tiny little red flags are coming up. The person's like, oh yeah, no, I like this person, but I don't know. And this doesn't feel comfortable. But they've already opened up to them and they've maybe again shared stuff that's abandonment related. What the narcissistic person will do, the person might say, can we slow down? Like, this is going really fast. I like you, but can we slow down? And the narcissistic person will turn around and say, I'm thinking you probably really don't want a committed relationship. Why would, I'm really into you and I really want something with you and I see a future with you, but this whole slow down thing, maybe we're not on the same page. So if a person has even a shadow of a doubt and wants to stay in this relationship, that's when the rush can happen. They'll say, well, I actually think I do want a committed relationship. So they're gaslighting. This person does want a committed relationship. They're just asking for things to slow down a little. And then the narcissistic person will play on that abandonment wounds. I think I'm going to go. And for most people who have abandonment wounds, they will just rush back in. And that's usually where the whole thing falls apart.
I know.
I don't mean to laugh. Like, I know.
No, it's so true. It's just so true. Do they know what they're doing? Is this like I really have thought so much about this. I've spent years thinking and like observing, and I they all fit the same blueprint.
Yeah, they do.
Like they fit the blueprint. Actually, it might be a good time to go into the types of narcissists, because I wasn't dealing with an overt narcissist, it was a covert. So, I think it's interesting to get into that, but I just don't, they all just fit into this pattern so well that I don't know that they really know they're doing it. And I'm not trying to let them off the hook, or do they?
Well, I guess what the question becomes, do they know what they're doing, right? So we're having an experience of what they're doing, right? We feel like we're being played, right? We're being manipulated. We're being drawn in. It's like pull us close, push us back, pull us close, push us back, which, by the way, is another thing that happens in these relationships a lot. There'll be a frenzy of texting and you're like, whoa, and then they'll silence. Frenzy of texting, silence. That's how the trauma bond gets formed, right? And then you're like, oh, I want more.
You're like, you really want them, so you think they're there, and then you try and make up an excuse why they're not really there. And then, exactly.
You become obsessed, and then you become so relieved. And I just want to make one comment to that before we get to the types. There is this beautiful analogy. A woman named Rebecca Humphreys, who lives in the UK, she's written a book on gaslighting and relationships, and she was caught in a very public scandal involving gaslighting, like where pictures of her boyfriend kissing someone else ended up on the front page of the tabloids because he was famous, and it was a whole thing. She wrote this great memoir, and she gave this great analogy where she said, in a narcissistic relationship, you're swept away and they take you to the top of a 100-story building, and it's exciting and the view is beautiful. And then they push you off, but they're hanging right there at about the 3rd story to catch you before you hit the ground. So they become both perpetrator and savior. They give you all the texts, they pull out. So they become everything. And so you create this really strange sort of association.
Breadcrumbing is how it, like when I'm talking to people about it, I tell them, I'm like, you're getting breadcrumbed. Like, it's just enough because you really want it to work. And it's like, and you remember the very beginning with all the idealistic, amazing things that are said and done, and they whisk you away, and it's so amazing. But then, but those breadcrumbs, you're feasting on them.
Right. And they are, but yet you're at the same time, you're starving to death because it's not enough. Exactly. And that's that hollowing out. So do they know what they're doing? What they know is that they like attention, they like admiration, they like validation. And I don't even know that they know that. They need those things.
Yeah.
So they're in a relationship and they're going to behave in a way that's going to get them attention, admiration, and validation. So they're doing the thing that feels good. That's what it is. And so the rest of it, because narcissistic people are actually incredibly not self-examined people. For how much they like to talk about themselves, they don't actually understand how they tick because it's too shameful. So they make up some grand narrative about some self-development nonsense, but they really don't understand what makes them tick. So it's not like they're sort of some Dr. Evil rubbing their hands together and saying, ha ha ha, I have a new victim. I'm going to destroy this person from the inside out. They're like, Bub, I like that person. They're hot. I want to, I'm going to hang out with them. And then I want them to tell me I'm great. And it's a game. It's a game for them. And so, and if the more a person brings status or attractiveness or something that the narcissistic person needs, they're really going to hustle up to keep that person around. So they're not as tactically smart as you think. They're doing what works for them. And they're not really, it's not organized. It's almost like asking, like, does a 3-year-old know what they're doing? At any given time, a 3-year-old's doing what feels good. And so is that some organized strategy? I suppose over time, the 3-year-old will learn what works. But a narcissistic person is the same way. They're not really sure what's happening internally. They're just, they're running a hustle. But they don't even think they're running a hustle. That's the problem.
That makes sense.
They think they're dating, or they think they have game or something like that. But they don't, they certainly don't think that they're going into this to harm someone. They think they're great people.
They probably don't think they're a narcissist, like in those words, right? Because that's like the number one reason why you can know that you're probably not a narcissist is that you would think maybe I am, right? So they never ever think they are. I don't think they are aware, but they know what they know what they need to feel good, and they'll do whatever it takes to feel good. And the real question then becomes, how do they not see the cyclical nature of the pattern of their life. Like, how do they not see? Because there's such a, this is my observation, please correct me if I'm wrong, but they have a very cyclical, like, repetition of cycles in relationships, right? Would you agree?
They do. And so you got to remember they're also master storytellers, right? So number one, they have a tremendous to themselves and the world. So they have an incredible capacity of foisting blame on other people. Oh, I keep attracting the same kind of terrible people. So it's like the only thing they're going to say is consistent is poor me, I'm attracting these terrible people. That's why it's a cycle.
Oh man. That's not helping them, but like that's still, so there's no way for self-reflection, because I've even looked at that in my own life, like, okay, what kind of people, what kind of guys am I attracting? And like, I can find a pattern, right? Like, because you don't end up wanting the same thing over and over again, and you don't want things to fail. You want them to succeed. So it's crazy that they wouldn't be able to see, they would look at it as a victim as opposed to a pattern.
Yeah, no. Because to view it as a pattern would mean they're not perfect, that they'd have to take some responsibility for that.
There it is.
Yeah. So it's really, why am I attracting these bad people? Like, what, I'm a bad person magnet, but no sense of what they, that they keep repeating the same thing. And like I said, they'll take no responsibility. They will always place the blame for why it didn't work out on some sort of easy breezy, easy to sell external factor. We were traveling too much, or they will make it about some flaw inherent in that other person.
So what's their core wound? Because they're coming from a wounded place, is correct? So what is that? What happens to them?
So there's sort of there's a couple of different pathways that people get to narcissism. Pathway one is sort of the pathway of adversity. It can be trauma, it can be neglect, it can be unavailable or inconsistent caregivers, it can be attachment wounds, that kind of thing. And so there's a sense of this sort of internal not good enoughness, right? Which they then try to cover up with grandiose defenses. Usually people who have that sort of adversity pathway, they were likely born with a more difficult temperament, more externalizing, more attention seeking, maybe even more sort of behaviorally hyperactive. And the combination of that could result in narcissism. Most people who grow up like that, that's not how they end up, but that's one risk factor. So then that wound is usually an attachment wound. It's a lack of safety in relationships. It's almost like the sense of, I'm going to be perfect and overcompensate, and I will be loved, and I don't need all these feelings, because feelings are a source of shame, right?
Is it the unmet emotional needs as a child? Do they feel unseen, and so they have to hide aspects of themselves then, and that's the sort of the mask that they then wear for the rest of their lives, that they're trying to hide from other people because like their mother didn't love them the way they were, their father didn't love them the way they were. Like, how do they actually get into that patterning? What does a parent do?
So the parent may abuse them, neglect them, mock them, shame their needs. They may also, then you have sort of what I call the kind of, the performing pony kind of conditional love narcissism. If the kid has a skill, like the kid, I don't know, it plays the piano or plays soccer or is a great student or does a sport or something, that might be the way that kid gets loved. And then the kid's like, okay, I'm going to really do well at this because then I'm going to get really loved. And that might be enough to win the parent over, for at least for a period of time. But then that child gets a very, very, very clear lesson that all love is conditional, because the only time their parent's going to look up and not shame them is if they're succeeding. But even then, when the child succeeds, the parent will continue to shame them. Why didn't you play better in that game? Why didn't you get all A's? That other kid got A pluses. That other kid's already taken college classes. That other kid has already been scouted by whatever university. So they're always
Never
the
enough.
parent. It's never enough. So the parents are moving the goalposts too. And so all of that means that kid does have to create this sort of, again, this really strong sense of defenses and grandiosity and all of that. But you got to remember, Danica, the vast majority of people who grow up like that do not become narcissistic. So it's not like everyone who grows up like that becomes narcissistic, but we can certainly look backwards at that narrative and we can see it. But then there's another group of narcissistic folks that it's not about the traditional adversity, right? Like the mean, neglectful, or even physically abusive parent. These are parents that are overindulgent. They tell their kid, you're more special than any other kid. You're better than all of these people. I can't believe you even have to be in school with these, these foolish people. And so the kid is really almost like indoctrinated into this sense of entitlement. Many times these are kids where their emotional needs aren't met. They aren't taught to regulate their emotions. They're allowed to tantrum and run roughshod, and they get materially anything they want. And they have a lot of that, but the parents really aren't emotionally there. However, the child does get communicated to them that you are chosen, you are more special. And so that's almost more of a pathway to grandiose narcissism. In those cases, it's quite likely that the parent might be narcissistic too, which can be vulnerable. But again, not everyone who grows up like that becomes narcissistic. Some of them actually grow up really embarrassed and ashamed. And so you can always tell the story of narcissism backwards, but it's very difficult to tell forwards. But those core wounds are there, but those core wounds are tricky, Danica, because a lot of people will say, ooh, they did have a rough story. I get it. Am I wrong for holding them to a behavioral standard? Am I wrong for expecting this of them if they were hurt as a child? Line up a bunch of people. Most of us were hurt as children, and most of us aren't going around and running roughshod and wreaking havoc in other people's lives.
So is this part of why it's hard to identify true narcissistic personality disorder, because there's not like a firm blueprint on it?
Well, I think there's kind of a blueprint. I think that the problem is, what you got to remember is that nothing about human behavior and human psychology is what we call deterministic, meaning that there's no guarantees. It's not like, genetic illnesses where if you have this gene mutation, this is what's going to happen. There's some genetics, and we could say certainly the odds, it's all about probabilities. Personality stuff is where it gets a lot more funky and a lot more hazy, because we have this piece of temperament, then we have the early environment, and then, we have sort of all the other things that happen to the person, and still the vast majority. Because remember, the prevalence of narcissistic personality disorder is somewhere between 1% and 6%, which means 94% of people don't have it, which means the vast majority of people who might have had identical childhoods to them. In fact, I see this all the time. I work with people who have a narcissistic sibling. The most empathic person might be my client, and their sibling is a malignant narcissist. And I'll say, did you grow up similarly? They'll say, yep.
Of course.
We were very similar. I mean, there was no, it's not like my parents got divorced at a different age or we moved, or like, it was similar. But they said, but the difference was, and most of them will say, my sibling was like never a picnic. Like even when they were young, they were demanding and difficult and just a pain in the neck. And we do that pain in the neck quality is kind of a universal in people who go on to be narcissistic. They tended not to be the easiest kids.
Okay. I've been thinking about something, and it's a little bit of a thought, like just an interesting thought. I'm curious where you land with all this, but my sister has 4 kids. All my friends have kids. Everybody has kids. And, a kid will say, "Oh, Mom, are you okay?" And they'll be like, "I'm fine." And there's like a million of those little lies that happen raising children, I feel like, where you're trying to protect them. You're trying to not overwhelm them maybe with problems they don't need to hear about. You don't want to get after them for every last little thing. You don't want to be honest about something because you just don't want to tell them. Like there's a lot of these little lies that come along that are done in an innocent and sometimes even very loving way. But I wonder how detrimental these little lies are, where a child has a really clear understanding of what's going on, and a parent doesn't honor that and take responsibility for it. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how detrimental that could be to children as they're growing up, that their reality essentially is being denied. They are somewhat being gaslit consistently, right? Like even just the simple one of, "Mom, are you okay?" And they're like, "I'm fine. I'm fine. Everything is fine." It's like the kid knows you're not okay, but you just lied. And like, it seems to me, like listening to you, that one of the really big indicators that you said at the very beginning is like the body will tell you something's wrong. But so many things, not just parenting, but so many things that we do take away from this physical connection we have to information and puts us up in the head. And so if we go up in the head with information, just going back to narcissists, they'll tell you you're amazing, you're my soulmate, you're the one, like I love you so much, all these things. That's not true, because you don't feel the same as what the words are. So what are your thoughts on the way that children somewhat possibly get gaslit or manipulated when they're young?
Yeah, it is a very, very complex, nuanced question, right? Because you've got sort of two sides to this. At one level, the child also can't fully be a repository of their parents' misery, right? So if the mother were to keep saying, "Mom, are you okay?" and the mom's like, "I'm fine," versus the kid says, "Are you okay, honey? I'm devastated because I am being invalidated and emotionally abused." No kid could hear. But the middle ground of that would be
Mm,
something like, "You know what, sweetie, you're so kind to ask me because I'm having a little bit of a hard day. And sometimes grown-ups do. I want you to know this is not has nothing to do with you. In fact, I'm so grateful for
mhm,
you. However, sometimes grown-ups have tough days. Sometimes grown-ups don't get along. And I'm
mhm.
figuring it out, but I'm so grateful that you noticed it." So now what you've done is you've validated that the child picked up on something. So they start sort of honoring their detector. You're letting them know because above all else, a child has to feel safe, right?
Mhm.
The child can't think that there's an impending possibility that everything's going to split up or they're going to have to move or all of that, that the parent has it well in hand is what
Yeah.
the child needs to, even if the parent doesn't believe that, but can say that, yeah, you kind of read the room right on that one. Like
Yeah.
I'm having a little bit of a hard day. I don't disagree with you. And I think that we have often erred in the side of the parent is devoid of emotion. The parent should only be
Right.
strong for the child. And I think that the
Right.
parent can be strong for the child while also validating the child. I just think, though, Danica, that the vast majority of people, especially people who are going through narcissistic abuse in their relationships, they're already so confused and they're so worried about their kids that it feels like the easiest thing to do is to tell the kid everything's fine, everything's fine. And I think that that's a very high order kind of an ask for a person to be able to say, "Well, I'm having a tough day and thank you for noticing and
Mhm.
I'm going to be fine and it's amazing you noticed because that meant a lot to me." So the child's now being reinforced for their kind of empathic bid, for their empathic reach in. I think all of that's great. It's going to waver based on the child's age too. I mean, obviously with an
Mhm.
adolescent, you're going to have a little bit more reach than you might have, and that's going to be different than puberty, then that's going to be different than middle childhood, and then obviously earlier childhood, and then toddlerhood and all that. But it's amazing. I've seen toddlers, 3-year-olds, go up to a distressed parent and offer them their bear or their toy or their pacifier, whatever suits
Right.
them. Children are remarkably attuned because they have to be attuned for survival. And I do think that we do make that mistake. We think
Yeah.
we're doing the good by not making it their problem. I
Yeah.
think the challenge, though, Danica, is that some people, they're saying, "Well, what can I tell them their other parent is a narcissist?" No, you can't. That's too much for them. It's not one
Mhm.
parent blowing things up like that for the child. It's too much. But if the child were to
Mhm.
say things like, "How come daddy's always yelling at us? I hate it when daddy comes home," right? The mistake most parents make is, "Daddy works really hard, honey." It's like, don't we have to understand that he's working hard and supporting us. That's not the right answer because that child, you have to say, like, it's, I have to be honest with you, it's not okay when grown-ups yell like that. It's not okay. And we wouldn't let a kid yell like that. And here's a grown-up yelling, and they know it's hard. Are you okay? So you're
Yeah.
letting the kid know this yelling behavior, not okay. You're not saying dad's a bad guy. You're not
Mhm.
saying dad's a narcissist, but you're also not excusing dad's behavior. That's the sweet spot, is that idea of validating the child's experience
Mhm.
without getting into the weeds.
Yeah. Because it's not just even about being specifically within a narcissistic situation in the household. This is about raising children that stay attuned to their
Correct.
body so that
Correct.
they can sense when they are in the presence of one and then they know what to do.
Right. And I think that idea of children being allowed to be attuned to their body, it's a tough one because what gets challenging is a parent can, with good faith, really attempt to do that with a child, really, let them be somatically focused
Yeah.
on them. They're still going to a school where that's not going to be permissible. What's that, 6, 7 hours of their day?
Mhm.
So there's a place where that is being shut down. So if the child says, "Teacher, Miss Smith, I'm not feeling okay in my body. Can I step out?" The teacher's either going to think the kid's sick or might say no. Or, does you understand what I'm saying? 'Cause our world
Mhm.
isn't set up for this. So I
Mhm.
agree, though. I do think one thing parents can do, this is why teaching kids meditation and mindfulness, and even like in a story, you might read a storybook that has kind of a tense, not even, I say tense, like maybe the little bear's feelings got hurt. And you might say to your child, how are you feeling? And they'll say, I'm really feeling sad about the bear. And you might even see that they're like holding their chest and like, what are you feeling? They're like, I feel it in my heart. So yeah, we feel feelings in our body. So there are ways to do this, but we have to engage with our kids in a way where we're attuned to what these emotions are about.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I think we should go through the kinds of narcissists. I think I'm going to skipped along, but I think that's a good thing to articulate, because it can be sometimes a little hard to tell what's going on. Not every one of them is an overt narcissist that is so blatantly obvious because they're loud and proud and one-upping you all the time and, irrational and drama-filled. Sometimes they're a little different. So could you please kind of go through the most classic kinds of narcissists?
Yeah, so the most classic is the grandiose narcissist, often called the overt narcissist, but the grandiose narcissist is sort of the textbook narcissist. They're arrogant, they're pretentious, they brag, they're controlling. They can be very charming. They need to be the center of attention. They don't let anyone else be the center of attention. When they're on, they can be the most interesting, charismatic person to watch. When they're not getting all the praise and adulation, or they don't win or whatever it is, they can get quite angry. But they are definitely sort of your salesperson, CEO, celebrity type, shiny narcissistic person, right? And that's what we often think of it as. The kind of underbelly of that is something we call the vulnerable narcissist, which is traditionally people have used the language covert narcissist, but sort of the clinical language is a vulnerable narcissist. Okay. And the vulnerable narcissistic person is sullen, passive aggressive, angry, a little bit socially anxious, chronically view themselves as a victim. They will, they'll be preoccupied with their own pain. We see those patterns. So these are people, whereas the grandiose narcissistic person will live in a fantasy world where they're often enacting the fantasy. They're like, I'm going out there, I'm going to hustle out funding for my company. They might even work really hard, and they can be quite successful. Yeah. The vulnerable narcissistic folks, we see a lot of failure to launch there. There's a lot of talking about the big plan, but they don't enact the big plan because they feel like people should make it easier for them. And when they face even one barrier on their pursuit of their big, grand, kind of vision, they get frustrated and they stop because they feel entitled to it succeeding just like that. So these are the proverbial people who end up in their parents' basements in perpetuity. So that's more the vulnerable narcissistic folks. And they're very grudgingly angry. They get angry when they don't feel appreciated. They get angry when they feel like they don't get enough credit. They feel angry when people don't tell them they're great. It's just like, they're always grr, grr, grr. Actually, a kind of a dangerous form of narcissism too, because whereas the grandiose narcissistic person is often quite extroverted, might even come off as like they really care. The grandiose people really care what they look like to other people. So that can sometimes keep their behavior in check. The vulnerable people don't have that, so they can snap a lot easier. Then there's the malignant narcissist. Now, narcissism's on a continuum. At the mild end, we have sort of the selfie obsessed, Instagram, emotionally stunted, selfish, look at me, emotionally immature narcissistic folks. At the other end, we have these more severe malignant narcissistic folks where we see things like coercion, exploitation, and taking advantage of people, much more severe manipulation. They isolate people. They're scary. They keep people in place by the threat of the menace that would come if you get them angry. So people are again, can be quite scared of them. I was actually recently, it's interesting, Danica, I was recently working with someone where their abuser was a malignant and vulnerable narcissist together. And
as you're talking, I'm like, maybe I'm a little off. Keep going.
No, there's rarely is somebody just one. And in this case, the person was so brutally and cruelly manipulative and worked systems and was so punitive, but they were absolutely wedded to this idea of they're a victim. How come nobody wants to spend the holidays with me when I've been such a good person? It's a lot of that stuff. So those two things come together and make their malignancy more potent. Then there are the communal narcissists. The communal narcissistic folks are the people who get their validation by doing what seem like good things for other people. But they're doing those good things not because they're empathic, but because they want validation. They walk around and tout themselves as humanitarians and look who I'm saving. It's always a photo op, but they get angry if they don't feel like, if they feel like they're not getting enough validation for it. So it was always about the validation. It wasn't about being committed to a cause. And people close to the communal narcissist will often say, you know, the whole world thinks this person's a savior and a pillar of the community, but they're really cruel to us at home. But their people in their lives can't get support because everyone thinks there's some grand savior. They'll often treat their employees terribly. They'll treat their families terribly, but to the world, they're a living savior. Then there are the self-righteous narcissists. And the self-righteous narcissists are very morally rigid. Their superiority comes from this idea that they're morally better than everyone else. The way they live is better. They'll often be obsessively organized. They'll wake up at 3 a.m. to start exercising, but they'll be very cruelly dismissive of anyone else who doesn't listen. You want to wake up at 3 a.m. to exercise, more power to you. But that's not enough for the self-righteous narcissist. They feel the need to shame anyone else who's not living in their perfect sort of a way. And so they're, again, very obsessively organized, really weird with money, almost miserly. They're kind of super workaholic, and they're selfish. Like they have other caregiving responsibilities, but they don't attend to them because it's how important, like, I work harder than anybody in the world. So there's all these different kinds. And when people hear this, they're like, oh, interesting. I never thought of that super ultra religiously, moralistically judgmental. The self-righteous narcissistic folks are incredibly judgmental. I didn't realize that was a form of narcissism, but they're like, you're right. There was no empathy. You know, they would say, like, a family member of ours kind of just hit some bad luck and they were about to get kicked out into the street. And the self-righteous narcissistic family member said, well, there are shelters for that. And that self-righteous person, and this person did nothing wrong. It was a job loss and things like that. And the self-righteous narcissistic family member was all about punishment. And it really messed that other person up. So it is that kind of rigidity above all else.
It's like ultimately a narcissist is always trying to get what? Like, what's that core definition of the narcissist part?
So a narcissistic person is motivated by power, control, superiority, and domination.
Got it.
The standard patterns and behaviors and traits we see within a narcissistic person are variable and relatively low empathy, entitlement, grandiosity, arrogance, the need for admiration, the need for validation, selfishness. They're very superficial. They're status seeking. They're vain. They envy other people. They think other people envy them. Again, they need to be in control. It's that whole power play. And all of these sorts of defenses and things I'm talking about, like the entitlement and all the rest of it, it all becomes these defenses that protect them from a really deep core insecurity and shame. But they're not in touch with that. They don't understand that. This is just how they go through the world. That's why if you even give them tiny feedback, because it sort of gurgles up that shame a little bit, they lash out at anybody, whoever leaves them feeling less than perfect.
Because ultimately, deep down, they kind of hate themselves.
They do. I mean, it's almost like deep down, I don't know if they hate themselves. They feel that it's almost this fear of being found out that's not clear to them, that people are going to see I'm not perfect. And I guess then all the catastrophe, I won't be loved, I won't be liked, I won't be a person. You know, they can't stand the thought of being ordinary. All those things are just too much.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the healing part, because your book, It's Not You, Identifying the Healing from Narcissistic People. I think the healing part is just as important as understanding, you know, what it is that they are. Of course, you'd love to avoid them, but it's a road, man. I mean, like, analogies have been used and that I've read and seen videos about, of how intensely serious the abuse is, almost to the point of, like, maybe an example has been like, you know, a death of some sort. Like it's a very intense wound. It's a very deep wound. So how is that they are able to wound us so deep? What is it that they take from us, or what is it that's gone? What is it that we forget? What happens that it makes it just like this hole? And if I'm just speaking from experience, like, it's almost like you have to rebuild yourself. You don't even know who you are to some degree. You don't know what is great about you. You're like not sure anymore what that is. You feel kind of worthless.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
how, like, it feels as though you've been stripped of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How did
Yeah.
I mean, so
How does
let's
that
talk
happen?
about the healing side of
Mm-hmm.
this, and just getting out of that deep hole that they it's just not the same. It's just crazy how deep the wound is.
So when we love somebody, we have certain expectations around them. We've had them since we're small. A child doesn't know about love, but they know about connection, attachment, and attunement. Human beings need those relationships. From when we were some children, we needed them to be safe. As we go through the rest of life, we need them to feel like a person. Like we're a social species. We need other people. We need other
Yeah.
people to reproduce. We
Yeah.
need other people to share with. That's just, we're not a lone wolf species. We're just not.
Right.
And so we need other people. And when most people, because like I said, the vast majority of people are healthy and empathic and want healthy connections. When we love someone, we go in thinking that this is about connection. This is about compassion. This is about empathy. This is about, turning towards somebody and keeping them safe. And when you learn that the other person in the relationship isn't playing by those rules, that you exist as an object to them. In fact, in psychology and counseling, we make the distinction between subject and object, right? A subject is another human being, right? So you, Danica, and I, Ramani, we're two different people with two different needs and experiences, and we're talking back and forth here, right? An object is something that serves a need. My water bottle is an object, right? That serves a function. I like my water bottle, but I really don't care about how my water bottle feels because it is a function for me. We're all water bottles to the narcissistic people. And largely our function is to bring supply. That's a really sobering recognition. But between the day we get into this relationship, whether it's the day we're born or we meet someone and fall in love, and the day we recognize that we are nothing but a water bottle to them, a lot of things happen. We change ourselves in 1,000 different ways to win them over. Maybe if I say this differently, maybe if I don't say this at all, maybe if I tell them they're wonderful, maybe if I have sex with them, maybe if I have dinner waiting for them when I come home, maybe if I stop talking to my friends, maybe if I stop working as much. It's like an experiment. We try everything. We try when we stop being ourselves.
And there's never an answer.
And
there's never supposed to be. That's not the game. There's never supposed to be.
No, because what I need is different all the time, right? In an hour, I'm not going to need my water bottle. I'm not going to think about it. Tomorrow morning when I want it again, I'm going to think about it again.
And they need drama for fuel. So they just keep making problems. So there's never a way out of the problems.
They need drama to feel dominant, right? Because here's the thing. If they can dominate you, if they're better than you, then in a way, it's almost more of a guarantee that you won't leave them, right? You need them. They don't need you. But in this whole big storm, we lose who we are. We doubt ourselves. We blame ourselves. Many times people in these relationships think that they are equally complicit. I didn't leave. Maybe I'm the problem. I did yell at them.
Yeah.
I think they're a narcissist. Maybe I'm disloyal. What kind of terrible person thinks their partner or parent, whatever, is a narcissist? I'm a monster. Like this whole thing happens for people. So by the time the lights go on, a very, very catastrophic series of things has happened within the person. And as the person wakes up, step one is that they recognize that this narcissist, they start saying, oh, this is a pattern, and they did this, and this is about supply, and all the things we're talking about. Step two is when that starts becoming about the self, because what you realize now is like, I don't even know what I want on my pizza anymore because I was told what I wanted on my pizza. I don't even know what I want the thermostat set at because I was always told, you can't be cold, it's warm in here. And I'm like, okay. So I would just put on a sweater. So I don't know. People will say, I had to learn me. And that is a devastation. And on top of that, when you account for this thing called trauma bonding, which is that deep, it's almost, it feels like an unbreakable connection with someone. And the trauma bond is created by the good days and the bad days, the pushing you off the building and catching you at the bottom kind of experience. You're my savior, you're my harmer. You're so nice on Monday, you're so terrible on Wednesday. Maybe there's something I can do. And we justify when we're in trauma bonded relationships. So people will say for months, sometimes years, they wonder, what did I do wrong? Did I make a mistake? Now that they're gone, I was just hearing from somebody who told me that her husband of 25 years or 30 years or something like that left her for someone much younger and is a terrible person. Like the best thing that could have happened to this person is this person's out of her life, but she's hurting and she feels panic at this person not being around, right? So when we're trauma bonded, even when someone who's absolutely unhealthy for us leaves us, we feel like we're constantly gasping for air. And so that also healing from all of those processes, radically accepting it.
Yeah.
But our identity was taken for some people most of their lives.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I guess I would say, you know, people like I've been single for for a while now, and you're like, oh, do you ever get lonely? I'm like, no, I might get bored, but the only time I've ever been lonely has been in a relationship.
Yeah.
And I would explain that to be because I abandoned myself so much that I was separate from me. And that's why I felt lonely. That's why I can sit alone in my house and not ever be lonely. I might be bored, but I'm not lonely because I'm with myself. I'm connected to my inner child. I'm connected to my intuition. I'm connected to my body's energy and what it's telling me in situations. For me, that's something that's come through after. It doesn't mean there isn't like an intense rebuilding that needs to happen, but I really felt like, you know, just explaining the lonely was because I was separate from myself. You have to be in those situations.
You do. And so what happens, I think you said it beautifully. We abandon ourselves. Some people will say they create a mask themselves to be in these relationships after they recognize what it is. And what happens too is that we have to abandon our bodies, our somatic sense that something's wrong. So when people are in these relationships, it's not as simple as I was in denial all these years. Like I just was, I thought it was a normal relationship. This whole time, your body was very aware this wasn't right. And that's why people in these relationships get sick. And it's not unusual to see autoimmune conditions, chronic health conditions building up the longer a person is in a narcissistic relationship. I've seen people develop cancers that they didn't have the genetic risks for. They didn't have any of the risks for. And I do wonder that your body that is in this kind of state of constant high alert, but you think that it's my fault, or this is just how relationships are, or you're just sort of, you're not getting it, that disconnection from your somatic self makes us sick in being in these relationships. And it can take a while to heal.
I mean, I had that. I had years of working on getting myself back that maybe my body had the ability to fight or overcome or deal with. But when you're in a constant state of high cortisol and your constant state of stress, high alert, I mean, like all of that just wears and tears at you over and over again. And you can't handle the workouts anymore. You can't handle the other work that you have to do anymore. And you sure as hell can't handle the breakup when it happens because, you know, like, and all of this just tears you down, 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 down. And yeah, I'm glad that you pointed that out because the health issue stuff is a real thing. Every now and again, you hear somebody say that a narcissist can change, but I don't think that's your opinion, correct?
I'd love to see the evidence when the people
right.
I really would. I mean, I would listen.
Like, give me patient 001.
I'm not so wedded to my point of view that if I could see that we could create meaningful change at a population level. Don't tell me a story about one person. You show me that hundreds have changed. You show me that and I'll believe. Don't give me a unicorn. I'm not interested. You have a personality. Okay. I have a personality. All right. You know what your personality is, I think. I certainly know what mine is. And I use this example all the time. I'm very agreeable. So I'm empathic. I'll probably maybe over-concern myself with other people. I'm humble. You know, I'm flexible. I follow rules. That's me. I'm also very introverted. So I don't like being in social groups. I don't like going out a lot to things. I'm very happy at home alone, like genuinely happy, not hiding from the world. I'm happy. Okay. That's who I am. I'm an agreeable introvert. And I know that about myself. So if I went to therapy and someone said, hey, Ramani, you know why you sometimes aren't doing so well? Like you don't push your book the way you should, or your business. to be a little bit more disagreeable. You need to be a little bit more assertive and aggressive. You need to be more entitled. You need to make a bit more noise. You got to call people, push them to do things for you. Stop following the rules, blah, blah, blah. Okay. You need to do that. Let's work on that. Right. And also let's work on you being a bit more extroverted. You got to network more, get out there more, go out 4 nights a week. Danica, I'm going to be very honest with you. If I had to commit to change, I don't want to be that person, but okay. And I could try. And if I tried, many days I would fail because they'd say, ignore that person who's in pain, Ramani, stay focused on the game. And I'd be like, oh, okay. But I would keep looking like that, right? Because my nature is that, right? Okay. That's Ramani and her personality journey. Maybe every so often I could show up at the big event in glad hand and get on the stage and say, hey, everyone, thanks for buying my book. And I'm not kidding. I'll go to a hotel room and sleep for 14 hours. I will be so tired after that. So now let's flip that to the narcissistic person. We expect the narcissistic person all of a sudden to become empathic and not entitled and care about other people and not think of themselves as the most special and not be arrogant and not go for admiration and validation and just be content in themselves. Why would they? I can't do it. Why should they? Who changes their personality? Short of a head injury or trauma, big trauma in adulthood, I haven't seen evidence of major personality change. And they're the least likely to change because narcissism by definition is a rigid personality style. Them's the fact. So if we healthy people, and maybe I'm giving myself too much credit when I say I'm healthy, but if I can't change my personality, I think it's ridiculous to think that they would change.
Yeah, totally fair. Can they be happy? Do you think that a narcissist can ever be happy?
Depends on what your definition is about happy for anyone. So I think there's 2 kinds of happy. I think there's fleeting happiness, and I think there's foundational happiness, right? So there are people in the world who are happy people, and they have bad days. And it doesn't mean that they're always walking around smiling like a Cheshire cat. It means that there's a happiness in them, and they get through their days, and they'll say, woo, that was the day, I'm going to bed. But if you ask them at any given point, they might say, I'm frustrated now, but like they're happy, right? Then there are the people who are sort of episodically happy. Like we might be happy because we're with a group of friends for dinner and people say, how are you doing? And then in the middle of that fun dinner, like, oh, I'm happy, this is good. But when the dinner is not happening the next night, they're not happy, right? So they can be made happy by a circumstance. Happiness is a tough construct, right? In fact, I think we struggle a lot with measuring.
Yeah, it's hard to...
And I think with narcissistic people, when they're happy to the degree they can be happy is when they're really well supplied. So when the narcissistic person has lots of money and they're super successful and maybe they want to be famous, maybe they want to be like notorious, maybe they want to be the best at what they do.
Maybe they are famous.
Maybe they are famous. Maybe they want so when they're at the top of their game, but even then, the problem for narcissistic people is they're terrified at who's coming up behind them. So if they're at the top of their game, they may not be happy because they're afraid there's someone coming up in second place who might knock them over. So I think that narcissistic people at best are episodically happy from like the moment maybe they win a gold medal or a world championship or a big award. Maybe in that moment they're happy for a minute, but then as soon as maybe there's a criticism or anything, that happiness goes away. They don't, for a narcissistic person, they don't hold happiness as a stable quality.
That makes perfect sense. I wanted to ask you a little bit here at the end. I'm going to wrap up with the topic of politics. Do you think that everybody that is a politician, or let's say even just like runs for president, do you think they are narcissistic? I feel like I've heard that. And we're coming into a year where, we're going to see so much of this coming through. And, is there a place in this world for narcissists? Maybe it's a great place for them. Maybe this is where their traits shine. I don't know, but
the association between narcissism and politics is getting more and more pronounced in the present time. Narcissistic people are always naturally drawn to leadership. They like being in power. They like the control. They like being the focus. Because you have to give up a lot of a life for politics, right? So most sane people don't go into politics because they want a balanced life. They want a private life. They want to protect their families. So there has to be some drive for power that's so overwhelming that people go into it regardless of the cost to other people, right? Very rarely does a person who's single strangely enough, go into politics. Almost every politician has a partner or spouse because we expect that, right? So I think that there is because of that power, that need for power, there's a natural drive in general for narcissistic people to go for politics. I think there might have been a time, maybe in our history, where there were leaders, at least in the United States, where narcissism wasn't as central. Though I think if we were to do a deep dive into the histories of every US president there was, we'd find more than not, there was a fair amount of narcissism present. Remember, they had to knock away a lot of barriers in the course of a career to get to that final landing spot, if you will, right? And that means that you had to, like, at times, really not be empathically attuned to other people, right? But I think it's on a spectrum. I think there's probably some presidents that had very little, not narcissistic, to presidents who are sort of the ultimate, like, so the laboratory perfect specimen of narcissism. I think the way politics has become now so divisive, so polarized, politics is entertainment, people voting for, voting from a sort of not just self-serving places, but like it's whoever makes the most noise is getting the most airtime. It doesn't matter what the philosophical bent of the news channel is. So I think we're in the ultimate era of narcissism in politics, like we've never seen before.
Do you think that the reason why Trump is so triggering is because you think that he's a narcissist? Is it easy to see from the outside, in your expert opinion?
Listen, Trump is bombastic. When Trump won in New Hampshire, you think he'd be happy. I mean, I'm thinking, like, talk about the comeback kid. But the first thing he did was he spent most of his time getting mad at Nikki Haley. That to me was such a classical move. That, remember what we just said, can a narcissistic person be happy? Even when they're at the top, they're not happy because they're looking at who's here. So they waste their happy time putting down the other person. Yeah. So here was his moment, and he spent it criticizing someone else. You tell me what that is.
Do you think that there's, who do you think is the most empathic candidate, or the best? Even just saying, like, who seems the most empathic? Forget it.
I'm
going to say who
nobody.
Seems nobody. Really?
What I'm seeing in American politics right now disgusts me. It disgusts me. Like, I think that I'm sure there are some small town candidates, town councils, state representatives, some county politicians. I have no doubt there are people doing that small town. There's some mayors out there that are probably good people who want what's right for their town. But at this national and global stage, we are not seeing it. It's getting selected out because, again, the population has to take some responsibility. Keith Campbell, a colleague of mine, is a professor at the University of Georgia. He's like, we can complain about these politicians all we want, but the narcissistic politicians are the ones who we keep voting for. So as a population, we have to take some responsibility for this, because if we know what this is and we're voting for it, they're never going to make the thing with a politician is any policy decision they make is going to benefit someone, right? They didn't want to benefit you. Yeah. It just by happenstance, every decision they make, someone's going to benefit from. Yeah. So we're no longer thinking in a humane way about people. We're not thinking about this policy could hurt people. I mean, it's not going to help me, but it could hurt people. People are absolutely voting from a place of self-interest right now. And that's really caused. So now the electorate is also contributing to, so you've got this really toxic dance. And I'll tell you, it's always a tricky topic to me, politics, because like I said, I've always felt that now in the last 20 years to be a politician in this country, there's got to be something off about you, because people are not built for this. So if you're able to do this and tolerate this, and again, it leads to often very profitable careers down the line for these folks. They get the power.
Get very wealthy on their small salaries.
They become very wealthy on their small salaries. And I remember being a kid saying, the president of the United States makes so little money. And I didn't understand speaking tours when I was 9 years old.
Yeah, it's true.
But I have to say that I steer clear of the topic just because it creates so much.
I know, I'm not trying to set you up to fail. It's just,
but it's really that I'm not in national politics. I'm not seeing anyone that's jumping out to me as an empathic candidate. They all seem to be. I don't care what party you're in, what state you're from. This is self-servingness at the highest level. Democrat, Republican, independent parties I haven't heard of. The self-serving nature of what politics has become, that basically that they're being allowed to, all these politicians, again, this is meant to be not party oriented, are tearing up the world for their own sense of their own need to be in power, their own need to sort of advance their own careers. And a lot of people are getting hurt. So I am not a good word to say about politicians. I can tell you that right now.
What's the solution?
You know what? I think that the genie's out of the bottle, and not in a good way. When social media came along, and I'm not going to paint social media as the boogeyman. Social media is a thing, right? Just like politics is a thing. It needs people to participate in it to make it toxic. But once upon a time, before social media, I'll be frank with you, the narcissistic people needed to leave their house to get validation. They'd actually have to go to work or go to school or go to the playing field. Like, you couldn't just stay home, right? Who was going to know? I mean, I'm old enough to remember a world, a full, robust adult world without social media in it.
Yeah, me too.
Now, right? And now this is very much a tool that serves narcissistic people very, very well. So I think that that's not the answer. I'm saying we've made the problem a lot worse with polarized media, 24/7 media. People have become a lot more conspiratorial. The people who sort of pull the media strings have really, they've triangulated. It's what happens in narcissistic families. One member of the narcissistic person will spread rumors about everyone in a family. And before long, everyone in the family is mad at each other, but only the narcissistic person is left smelling like a rose. And that's sort of what is happening, is that same form of triangulation happening by narcissistic players who run the media. And so I sound like I'm wearing a tinfoil hat, but
I wear it all the time. Don't worry.
But you know what I'm saying? So I think that
mine's permanently on.
The answer, though, is that we look to local politics as a place to start, because I think that's the one place many of us can feel like we could make a change. Like, you actually, in many places, you could actually meet your local council member. You could sit with them, and I'm not saying they're going to listen to you, and they may not be as narcissistic as everyone else. But there are smaller ways. Sometimes people engage with nonprofits. Like, there's it's sort of it's a lift from Voltaire, but I wrote about it in my last book, not this book, this idea of tend to your own garden. Like, make your corner of the world, infuse it with empathy and cooperation. Keep an eye on your neighbors, be a good friend, be a good citizen, put your cart back in that little grocery cart thing. Say thank you to the checker. Don't fight for the parking spot. There are 100 small things we could do every day that promote civility. And I honestly think that that the civilians, the citizens of the world, promoting civility could actually be the only way, because the leaders are not going to do it. That's now become profound.
Bottom up instead of top down, right?
Exactly.
I love that. That's a beautiful way to end this. And I love that message. So thank you, Dr. Ramani. And it's so good to talk to you again. And
thank you, Danica.
Thank you again for all your good work. I have watched and still watch so many of your videos, and you help many, many people. So thank you.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Good luck with the book. I see it in the background. Hold it up so we can see it.
I absolutely will. Without making myself fall. Everybody get it and read it, pre-order it, then get it. And then you'll be the first ones to read it. And I promise you, it's a roadmap to do all the things that we just talked about. So thank you.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Ramani.
Thank you, Danica. So good to see you again.
You too. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the Pretty Intense podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you heard today and you want to hear more, please click on the subscribe button.